So I keep hearing these public service announcements and commercials that are trying to spin quarantine like it's this great opportunity for us. Like, hey, this is a great chance for you to binge watch all of your favorite shows and get caught up. You just lay around all day and watch TV, right? Or, hey, this is a great opportunity for you to get out into nature, go on long walks with your spouse where there's no people at least, or the state parks that happen to be open, or I don't know, who has a property like that where they can just go for walks in the woods? I don't know. Or, hey, not having a job is so easy for you to catch up on reading the 50 books that are piled up on your nightstand, right? Like, quarantine is a great opportunity for you to get caught up. And I just wonder, who are these people talking about? Because, yeah, sure, some of those things sound wonderful, but I can't do any of them. I mean, I have kids that I have to help homeschool, like most of you. I have a job that I still have to figure out how to do, and frankly, quarantine isn't a bunch of downtime for me. Everything still continues, just with this whole twist of like, how in the world is this supposed to work? I was just saying to my wife the other day, man, if we didn't have any kids or jobs or frankly any responsibility of any kind, quarantine could be a lot of fun. I mean, are there any people out there like that? I doubt it. I can't imagine that there's a lot of people out there who are using quarantine like it's this big, lazy vacation. So for the rest of us who are having to work harder because of quarantine, my question today is, how are we supposed to find some joy in all of this? I mean, the things that you do to relax or that bring you some enjoyment, they're all kind of out the window. I mean, you can't go out, so you can't go to restaurants, you can't go to your favorite places, you can't shop. For those of us that like sports, you can't even watch TV on your couch because there are no sports. You can't go to the gym, you can't do much of anything. So where's the joy in life right now while you're in quarantine? Do you have any? Is it possible to find joy in all of this? Or in any suffering for that matter? Or does life have to be one big joy-sucking drain whenever painful experiences hit us? Are joy and suffering mutually exclusive experiences? Or can you actually feel both at the same time? Because I, for one, could really use some joy right now. Maybe you could too. Well, I think that Lamentations, in particular chapter 3, could be really helpful here. In case you haven't seen any of the other videos that I've done on this idea of lamenting and the book of Lamentations, here's a couple of real quick background points, okay? Lamentations is a book of the Bible that was written about 2,600 years ago, roughly. It was just after the ancient city of Jerusalem was attacked, besieged, and destroyed. It was terrible. Famine, disease, fire, destruction. All of the people hauled off into slavery by the Babylonian army. And the temple of God that Solomon had built in Jerusalem, it was completely leveled. For the people living there at that time, this wasn't just a tragedy. It was like the whole universe didn't make any sense anymore, as if God had given up on them. The person who wrote Lamentations, probably the prophet Jeremiah, he wrote these 5 poems wrestling with all this pain and anguish he was going through, living through all of these experiences, and wondering what in the world God was doing. In fact, the lamenter actually thinks all these terrible things, this pain that he's going through, is really from God. Like, he kind of accuses God of it. Like, God is actively doing all of these things to him, causing his pain. He says in chapter 3, starting in verse 3, kind of shuffling through there, he says, "Surely against me he turns his hand again and again, the whole day long." You ever feel like that? like God is turning his hand against you again and again and again. It kind of makes me think of those memes that you may have seen online about how we all thought 2020 was going to be this wonderful thing at the beginning, right? And then awful thing, awful thing, awful thing, awful thing after one after another happens again and again and again. 2020 is against us. And now in a cruel twist, we have murder wasps, right? Like, can it get any worse? Listen to what the lamenter says of his circumstances. He says, God has walled me about so that I cannot escape. He has made my chains heavy, though I call and cry for help. He shuts out my prayer. He has blocked my way with blocks of stone. He has made my paths crooked. It's almost like the anti-Psalm 23, right? Instead of leading me by still waters, he's chained me up. Instead of providing for me, he has broken my bones. Instead of straight paths that he leads me down, paths of righteousness, he has given me crooked paths. Listen to more from chapter 3. It says, he is a bear. God is a bear lying in wait for me, a lion in hiding. It's like God is hunting me. He has bent his bow and set me as a target for his arrow. He drove it into my kidneys, the arrows of his quiver, and I've become a laughing stock. He's made my teeth grind on gravel and made me cower in ashes. Sounds a little like 2020, right? The lamenter ends this section by saying, I have forgotten what happiness is. My endurance has perished. So is my hope from the Lord. Now, you may or may not relate very strongly with some of the words that I just read while you are in quarantine, but certainly at some point in your life, you'll feel most of those things. I mean, at least most humans do. And when you're in the pit, joy can seem very far away. And it can seem impossible to even think of anything other than the pain and the frustration of what you're experiencing, right? The lamenter has that trouble too. After giving this long list of how terrible his circumstances are, how unhappy he is, he says this. He says, remember my affliction and my wanderings, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually remembers and is bowed down within me. He keeps thinking about it. He keeps thinking about it. He keeps thinking about his affliction, his pain. He keeps rehearsing the arguments about who did what to him and how unfair it all seems, how awful he feels, how none of it makes any sense. We do the same thing when we're in pain. We keep thinking about it, arguing about it, reminding ourselves of every nuance of how terrible the situation is. You know, kind of like how when you turn on Facebook or the news, all you hear about is coronavirus, quarantine, social distancing, and how it's all gonna keep going. That's the trap that it's so easy for us to fall into in our pain. We keep thinking about it, and we wish we had happier circumstances, just like the lamenter here says. I mean, don't you long for happier days? But it's a trap. It's a trap because it convinces us that better circumstances are what will ultimately bring us joy. But that's not necessarily true. You can be a grump while you're at Disneyland, the happiest place on earth, and have zero fun. Joy doesn't come from your circumstances. Better circumstances, happier circumstances don't bring joy. They might make you feel happier, but happiness and joy are not the same thing. You see, happiness is an emotion we feel when circumstances are good. Good things happen, I feel happy. Like when quarantine is over, then you'll be happy. But you still may not have joy. At least what the Bible talks about as joy. Joy is deeper. It's more nuanced. It's about your soul being nourished, being firmly planted and centered. Happiness is fleeting, blown away by sad times. Joy is bedrock. And when we keep rehearsing how terrible our circumstances are, fixating on it like the lamenter does, wishing for better circumstances, we buy into the lie that circumstances will give us happiness. But happiness is not the most soul-satisfying thing in life. Get this. It's not the most important thing in life, happiness. It's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. But there's something far better that will bring you true bedrock joy. Do you want to know what it is? Listen as the lamenter finds it, as he kind of flips everything on his head after he's given this long list. He says, remember my affliction, my wanderings, the wormwood, the gall, my soul continually remembers it. It's bowed down within me, but this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. Did you catch it? The most soul-satisfying thing in all the universe, the greatest source of joy, despite your pain or sorrow or quarantine or bad circumstances of any kind, the greatest source of joy is God himself. He's the portion that I choose, the best thing that I have or can have. That's why the lamenter says, God is my portion. It's kind of like when you're a kid and there's one piece of cake left, right? And you and your sibling have to split it, and you go and cut the cake, and then both of you examine them from both sides. Which one's better? This one's got more frosting. This one's slightly larger, and you choose the best possible portion. That's what you want. That's my portion. And the lamenter looks around and sees all of the possible things that he might have in life, good circumstances, happy circumstances, and not being sold into slavery, not having your home destroyed. And he says, you know, the very best possible thing I can have? Oh, that's God. He's my portion. God really is the most wonderful thing in all of existence. And when I call him to mind, joy is available. When I set my mind on him, who he is, how he lavishes his love, his goodness, his faithfulness on us, everything changes in the way that I see my circumstances. God himself brings the change in the lamenter. From sorrow and anguish and despair, torment over his suffering, to bedrock joy when he looks instead at God. The circumstances don't change, but our minds certainly can. We may not be emotionally happy about our circumstances, but looking at God, the most soul-satisfying thing in all the universe, will bring you joy, even while we're still sitting in the rubble or the quarantine. You see, joy and suffering are not mutually exclusive experiences. So today, I'd like, as I wrap this up, I'd like to give you an opportunity to move your attention upward for a couple of minutes, to refocus and to savor some of what I like to call God's perfections, or theologians call God's perfections. And maybe you'll want to choose him as your portion too. Maybe it'll bring you some joy in your quarantine to consider the perfections of God. Now, I'm not going to list all the scriptures here. You have to do some of that study on your own, but I'm just going to throw out some of these truths for you to consider. First, think about this perfection of God. His transcendent existence. Big words. You see, God is the maker of this world and every other world, and he sits outside of time and space, outside of everything that humans can possibly know. He's not part of it. He chooses to exist, and so he does. He's the only one who does. He's the only one who has a choice. He is wholly perfect, infinitely good. He is the definition of justice. He is the definition of love. Any other definition is meaningless without him. The Bible tells us he is completely satisfied within himself. God, 3 in 1. And I can't even begin to explain that here and now. He is the initiator of anything that moves. He is the imagination behind all thought. He is the source of every drop of creativity. He is immeasurably happy because he is the best thing in existence. Now think about this. If God is objectively the best thing in all of existence, then for him to value himself, his beauty, his glory, more than anything else in existence, is not wrong. If God objectively is the best thing, then you should value the very best thing most, right? So does God. He is the best thing, and so he values himself. So for him to value anything other, more than he values his own glory, his own good, he would be a fool, and God himself would be an idolater. He's the most valuable thing in all possible universes. And when we value and enjoy him, his person, his character, the way he treats us, the way he engages us, the way he loves us, above all things, we finally have our priorities and our pleasures in the correct, created order. In fact, that's just what Jesus prayed for us in John 17. He prayed for us to see, to experience, to savor his glory, and to be where he is so that we could see how great he really is. Do you taste that? The most supremely valuable thing in all of existence says this to you. Come experience the thing that will bring you the best, the most joy inside or outside of the universe. It's me. Enjoying God can satisfy you in ways that this world was never made to. He's the best possible portion. Second, consider this perfection of God. The suffering of Jesus. That's a perfection. You see, this God, in all of his power that I just talked about, all of his glory, all of his joy, all of his perfection, he made himself nothing. He wrapped himself in skin and bone. And he endured the taunts of schoolboys and teachers and kings, claiming that he was a bastard. Family members who thought he was crazy, literally. Friends who thought that he didn't know what he was doing. Crowds that watched him raise the dead, shouting days later, "Kill him!" He suffered being stripped of his reputation, stripped then of his dignity, stripped then of his skin, and then his father, but not his life. No. This, the King of the universe, chose to lay down. Why? For joy. Hebrews 12:2 says, looking unto Jesus, who for the joy that was laid before him endured all of that. Joy in revealing the infinite goodness of God. Joy in those that he's brought back to God. Joy in those who savor God's goodness because God chose to suffer. Do you taste that? The ultimate irony in all of the universe, the author of life died. The one who exists only by his will, choosing to give up his life. He did that so that you could know joy by knowing him. Okay, one more. I know this is long, I'm sorry. Consider this last perfection of God. Well, not the last, but the last I'm talking about. God delights in saving you. Did you know that God delights in the things that he makes? He does. They all give him joy. Genesis 1 says that he makes good things and he pronounced them, oh, this is good. Kind of like every piece of art that an artist has made, it fills him with a sense of delight and joy. But more than that, though, God delights so much in Jesus and in Jesus' sacrifice on your behalf that he joyfully applies salvation, your redemption, to you, those who place their faith in Jesus Christ. He gives it to you full of joy, excited for you. We think of God as like this begrudging God in his forgiveness. Man, you shouldn't have sinned like this. You shouldn't be so terrible. But man, you played the Jesus card, and so I have to forgive you. No, he's actually enthusiastic about forgiving you. Micah 7 says that God does not retain his anger forever because he delights in mercy. He will again have compassion. He delights in it. And he will subdue our iniquities. He will cast all of our sins into the depths of the sea. In his joy, he scoops it all up and he says, no more. You're free. God is enthusiastic about removing your sins. He delights in it. He joyfully is applying Jesus' sacrifice to your record. Do you taste that? That's the flavor of God's infinite perfections. That's the flavor of joy. And that's a joy that you can treasure no matter what sufferings you are facing. This is Lamentation's admonition to us today. Joy comes from seeing and savoring God. His person, his character, his heart, his relationship to you. Joy does not come from our circumstances. Happiness might, but joy doesn't ever. And the tragedy when we suffer is that the suffering can rip us away from the one who can satisfy your longings for joy the most. Suffering attempts to convince us that our happiness is found here on earth, in things, in people, in situations and homes and cheap knockoffs made of joy in Taiwan or brewed locally or reconstructed by a doctor. But your greatest joy is not found in the circumstances of this world, because joy is not a fleeting emotional experience. You will find joy in your suffering or in your quarantine only if, like the lamenter, you begin to savor the perfections of the most valuable, supremely satisfying, perfectly glorious God of the universe, and you say, that's my portion. That's what I want. Don't believe the lie that you'll truly be happy once you resume life as usual and leave your house and go to a restaurant. You don't get joy by your story taking a happy turn of events. You get joy by getting your attention on God, and nothing in this universe can give you joy like him. It was never meant to. Thank you for joining me. Our next video, I'll be in Lamentations 3 again. There's a whole lot more in the rest of the chapter that you probably should hear too. And I'm excited to be able to share that with you next time. So join me again. Please like, share, comment if you enjoyed this video. And hopefully we'll see you again next time. Thanks. Shalom.